This is season 2 of The Sweater with Kathleen Dames. Over the course of our 12-week season, we will knit the pearly pullover together. Hello, my friends, and welcome to episode 7 of season 2 of The Sweater with Kathleen Dames. We are still knitting the pearly pullover as modeled by Lady Jane, and I am about to start my second sleeve. Now, the second sleeve, there's such a thing as second sleeve syndrome, also known as second sock syndrome, being trapped on Sleeve Island. You knit, a lot of people, they start out, they knit the body, they knit a sleeve, and then they have to knit another sleeve. And I don't know about you, but that's kind of tough. So I recommend knitting one sleeve as your gauge swatch, like a secondary gauge swatch, to make sure you're getting gauge, get a sleeve out of the way, and then go to the body, which is sort of, exciting. It's a lot of stitches. Sometimes there's shaping or patterns, whatever. This one's pretty simple, but and then doing the second sleeve so that you only have one left to do before you join everything together to do the yoke. I also know some people like to get both of their sleeves out of the way at the beginning, and that's great. I don't do it just because I like to break it up. Like doing two of the exact same thing for whatever reason, that's me, it's hard for me. Some people do two at a time, and I think that's a great idea. If you can manage to keep everything separate, because you have either you have two separate sets of DPNs and you're working each sleeve separately, or you're working them all on one long circular needle and you're doing two at a time magic loop. So you'll cast on half the stitches for one sleeve, half the stitches for the second sleeve, the other half of the stitches for the second sleeve, and then the half of the stitches for the first sleeve, and join that. And so then you're working around all of them, which is pretty cool. However, I get tangled up enough trying to do one sleeve, especially alternating skeins, so I would have a really hard time doing two at a time. There are a few more ways to do two at a time. Well, I don't know if there are a few. There's one more way that I know of that's really cool. It's the War and Peace method. It's in Knitty. I'm not sure which issue it is, but it was done with socks. And there's a character in War and Peace who you cast on every other stitch from a separate ball, and you work them all together, and you have to alternate, I guess. And then at the end, you pull them apart, and you have two socks, and it's amazing. I have not yet even attempted that technique, much less mastered it, but it sounds pretty cool. It has that flair at the end where you pull them apart and you have two sleeves, or two socks is the traditional use for that technique. So if you're interested, I believe it's called the War and Peace method, or I'm sure there's some sort of two socks at a time technique that is also called. All that being said, I just want to say again for everyone that you are the boss of your knitting, okay? However it works for you is how you should work whatever you're knitting, in this case, your pearly pullover. I like to do one sleeve and then the body and then the other sleeve. I have a friend who likes to do two sleeves and then the body. And I'm sure there are plenty of people who like to do the body, get that big circumference out of the way, and then do sleeves one at a time, or then do both sleeves together. It really doesn't matter. What's written in the pattern is pretty standard. It's the standard language. It's how we generally in this business describe creating a sweater. But there's nothing to say that you can't work things out of order, as long as you get to the point where you have the body and two sleeves and you join them together. That you need all those pieces, and then do the yoke. And that's of course working bottom up. I also know some people who have flipped this around in other designs of mine and work them top down, because that's the way they like to work them. And so I just want to say again, you're the boss. If you like working top down, you can figure out how to do it. I'm not going to tell you. I don't work top down very often. That's me. But you're clever. You can figure it out. And at the end of the day, it's only sticks and string. So please don't panic. Please don't feel like, oh my goodness, I followed the pattern and I knit the body first, so now I'm in trouble because I didn't knit a sleeve first. It's fine. As long as you get the desired outcome, how you get there is up to you. And that's one of the things I love about knitting, is that there are lots of different ways to solve the problem of making a sweater or making a scarf or whatever it is. You know, there are varieties of techniques. There's no one right or wrong way. When I hear somebody say, oh, I was at a knitting group and somebody told me that I was knitting wrong, I get really angry, because there are lots of different ways to make that stitch, you know, and whatever works for you, gives you the fabric that you like, is what you should go with. You're supposed to be happy. It's supposed to be fun. So I just wanted to say, for the record, have fun. Don't feel that you're doing something wrong because you're not doing it exactly the way I am. I'm just trying to help you and give you a bunch of different options for how to do things. So that being said, I'm going to cast on my second sleeve with a long circular needle. This is it. This is the one I've been using. I used it for the first sleeve and for the body. I like that sort of consistency. And I'm going to cast on, and I'm going to do magic loop. I'm going to start in the round from the very beginning. You don't have to. We talked a little bit about, I think in the body episode, about, or the casting on episode, that if you're having a hard time keeping those stitches straight, that you could do the ribbing flat, work it back and forth, and then join in the round. Because one of the reasons this has worked in the round is that the knit stitch just knit round and round and round goes quickly. And that's great. And that makes this like a really satisfying, you know, for me, it's a satisfying sweater to knit, because sometimes you need a good whack of simple stockinette. You just need to form those knit stitches over and over again and get that muscle memory going with your fingers. Other times, of course, I love a complicated cable sweater or lace or whatever, but sometimes I at least just want stockinette in the round or garter stitch worked flat. I just want to knit. And it's great also for things like knit night or working in low light situations, or when you're watching television, if you're up for that. I've taught children how to knit, usually like fourth graders, and they all want to learn how to knit without looking at their knitting. And they look at me, and I've been knitting for years, and I can do it as long as it's pretty simple. I can just knit by feel. And that's what they want to do. So this is a great project to practice knitting by feel, or practice if you know continental and you want to try English style knitting, or vice versa. It's a great way to sort of build up that muscle memory and practice the knit stitch, or practice the purl stitch. You know, you could knit it purl side out, have it really be a purly pullover, although I'm cheating and knitting mine knit side out. You certainly could do that too. Again, you are the boss of your knitting. So I'm going to cast on the other sort of number one way to do a small circumference is with double pointed needles. So you certainly could do that, and I would recommend casting on using 5 needles total, casting on over 4 needles and using that 5th as the working needle. And if you haven't worked with double pointed needles before, this might be a good time to try it, because you are just knitting around and around. It's similar to sort of a sock, but of course we have the increases every once in a while. But I like double pointed needles. I have gotten used to them. The thing to remember is in the beginning, if you are using double pointed needles, that I recommend pulling a little on that first and second stitch with the new needle to sort of make sure there isn't too much of a gap there, or shifting around where you start the next needle. So instead of knitting to the end and switching needles, knit to the end and then knit 1 or 2 more stitches, and do that all the way around. And that shifts the point where you're shifting from one needle to another, because oftentimes we get ladders, we get a little bit of a gap, and if you do it at the same place every round, you will end up with what looks like a ladder. Now, hopefully that will sort of shift itself out. Hopefully it's not a huge gap. Blocking can help that, washing and blocking. But especially if you're new to double pointed needles, it can be frustrating. And that's the other reason I recommended 5 needles instead of 4, because you can do a tube on DPNs, as we call them, with 3 needles and working with the 4th, but that point where the needles connect is a sharper point, and that tends to cause more of a ladder, and so you don't want that. I I don't think you want that. So I highly recommend, more double pointed needles will help ease that around that circumference a bit. So, but I like Magic Loop. I've gotten used to Magic Loop, but I will say the very first time I tried to knit a sweater with Magic Loop, I did the body first and then I did a sleeve, and I finished the sleeve, and then I looked at them, the body and the sleeve, and I could tell just by looking at them that my gauge was significantly different on the sleeve. But that's because it was my first time using Magic Loop. I was a little nervous and I was pulling tight, and it just made a whole completely tighter sleeve. And so that sweater is still in timeout. Still in timeout. I'm sorry, sweater. You were off to a good start, but it just was not meant to be. So at some point I will have to figure out what I'm going to do about that. But that's just to be aware of that, that can be an issue. So practice, try and relax. Don't be so anxious that you're tightening up if it's a new technique. And remember that if it's terrible, you can always rip it out again or put it aside. Like I said, that sweater is still in timeout. And I'm sure I will at some point frog it and do something else with the yarn. If it's not making you happy, let it go and find some new use for the yarn. Or find another yarn that will work with the pattern you want to knit. Okay, so I'm going to cast on. Let's see if I can remember. I'm going to cast on 36 stitches for my sleeve. I'm working with Happy Fuzzy Yarns DK, Merino DK in the peony colorway. I love this yarn. It's such a happy color. It's perfect for this sort of late spring, early summer time. And I am going to do the two-tail long-tail cast on, which makes me very happy because I never run out of yarn. You should know all this from previous episodes, but if you're coming in now, go back and check out the cast on episode. We talk about the two-tail long-tail cast on and how great it is for any number of stitches that we're working. Okay, so I'm going to cast on, hopefully while I'm talking to you, and remind you, what am I going to remind you of? I'm going to remind you that after we do the ribbing, which matches the hem and collar, that we're going to start our increases. We want to make sure those increases happen at the same time, and that's why some people like to do 2 at a time. And so if you're thinking about doing 2 at a time, search that term. 2 at a time sock knitting is probably your best bet because that's where it really started. And the nice thing about that is that you then do the increases on one and then the increases on the other, and so you're really consistent. I find because I do one sleeve at a time, when I finish the increases for the second sleeve, I have to start counting rows and measuring a lot. And so I really should sort of refine that technique. Probably make a note of how many rounds I knit on the first sleeve after the last increase. That would be helpful, because sometimes just measuring doesn't work out so well. I also find that holding the sleeves up to one another is helpful, but you still should double check by counting or measuring the rows as well, because sometimes the needle in the top of the stitches can sort of distort things a little because it's rolling. We're doing stockinette, and of course this one actually has a needle holder in it, so it should feel very similar, but sometimes I'll have put waste yarn through the sleeve, and so that just makes it a little different. So double and triple check to make sure that your sleeves match, unless of course your arms are different lengths. And then you probably want to knit a few, one or the other. But as a general rule, we're trying to make sure that they match. And I just once again pulled this sleeve so it's knit side out so that I won't accidentally join them incorrectly. So Jane's going to hold sleeve 1. I'm now going to count because I think I'm pretty close. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26, 28, 30, 32, 34, 36. I went well past once again. So thank you for counting along with me. Another reminder that just like in woodworking, carpentry, measure twice, cut once, but in this case, count twice. Okay, so now I've got my stitches on here, and I'm going to join for working in the round. And for Magic Loop, I like to do about 1/3 of the stitches that get left on the right hand needle with the working tails. And in this case, remember, we've got everything set to go for alternating skeins. And then another third will be sort of in the middle, and the final third will be on the left hand needle, ready to be worked. And we're going to make a little triangle again, just like I said with the DPNs. So this ends up being kind of like 3 DPNs. And got to remember to slip our stitches off, that slip knot that I used to keep the yarn on, and we're ready to go. And just choose one strand, and then you'll start alternating. It doesn't matter which of the strands you choose to begin. And so it's kind of a little tiny triangle, and it's like using 3 DPNs. And so again, just as I mentioned for working with DPNs, if you are doing magic loop, I recommend changing your gap points where you're pulling out those ears of the needle, changing those every once in a while, working a little farther or pulling it out at a different spot when you're ready to pull out those ends. So that way that you don't have a ladder, that those little gaps that will sort of shift back because the yarn wants to achieve that sort of equilibrium and be all even. It takes a little while to do that, so it's not going to happen magically, but so that you don't have those gaps and you're not making a ladder to change your points there. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and of course I'm counting again, 5, and then I'm purling through the back loop to twist that stitch, but we won't really see the twist until we actually turn the sleeve inside out. It really is almost invisible on the knit side. Okay, so I'm going to work my way around and be excited that I'm working on my second sleeve. A reminder that if you have questions about any of this, to please ask in the Ravelry forums. You can also ask if you're watching this on YouTube. There's a comment section underneath the video. That's a great place to ask too. You can tweet me at Kathleen Dames if your question is short. Post on the Instagram. Usually I do an Instagram post of the episode, so that's another place. There are plenty of places you can ask a question if you get stuck. Reminder that the forums on Ravelry are particularly helpful because then I'm not the only one answering. The Ravelry forums are public. Anyone in my group or not in my group is welcome to participate, and a lot of times Ravelry forum members are there at a different time of day than I am. I check them regularly. I'm always happy to answer questions, but it's nice to have that sort of group mind who can help. Everyone can help you. And please also remember, I know I said this during the live show, but I'm going to say it again. Just as you are the boss of your knitting, you are never the only person that has a question. Never. Just be the one who's brave enough to stand up and say, I really don't get it. Because there are all sorts of different things that some of us get and some of us don't. We all have different things that we are masters of. And so why not put that all together and share our knowledge. But please know that you are never asking a dumb question. There are just things that you haven't figured out yet. Maybe I have, maybe I haven't. Maybe I've just done it one way all along without ever really thinking about it. And if you ask the question and I think about it, I'll come up with a reason why, or I may even find a better technique for me and for you. And if I do, I of course will share it all with you. So I think that's everything for today. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you're working well on your sleeve. I'm gonna go work away on mine, and next week I'll be back and we're gonna join everything together. So when I finish this sleeve, I will also put the underarm stitches on waist yarn as I've done here, and we'll be ready to go. We'll be ready to do the fun and exciting joining, and then the yoke decreases, and we're getting that much closer to having our very own sweater. So thank you so much for joining me, and happy knitting. Mwah! Bye. This is season 2 of The Sweater with Kathleen Dames. Over the course of our 12-week season, we will knit the Pearly Pullover together. Many thanks to Reen at Happy Fuzzy Yarns, Corinna at Picnic Knits, Tara Swiger and my fellow Starship captains, and you for being a part of The Sweater with Kathleen Dames. Don't forget to visit KathleenDames.com/thesweater to sign up for the newsletter before July 22nd to receive your free copy of the Pearly Pullover in your welcome email. Is it after July 22nd? Just not a joiner? Purchase your copy of the Pearly Pullover from my Ravelry shop anytime. Be sure to share your progress on social media with the hashtags Pearly Pullover and KD Sweater. Questions, comments? Visit the Kathleen Dames Design for Ravelry forum today. Thanks so much for joining me, and happy knitting!